think it was a pretty disappointing year from the Cowboys, mainly due to Dak's injury, but overall it was still not really good enough even when Dak was playing. I think everyone bought into the Cowboys too much this year, though. I don't think they really... I don't really know why people were expecting such a big improvement from them. They were pretty bad in 2019, and really all they added was CD Lamb. And apart from that, they lost a few pieces on defense. So if anything, I thought they were going to get worse. And I think that was actually proven right there. I don't really know why people thought they were Super Bowl contenders, 13-win type team.
It's a miracle! Oh, yeah! What about that one? Unbelievable! Balotelli, Aguero! Crowd cheers. Here's Siddle. Oh, the ball is close! He's given him! He's given him! Peter Siddle's got a hat-trick on his birthday!
Hello and welcome back to the On The Ball podcast. This is episode 99 of the show, one before the ton. And I'm back to do the second half of what we started in episode 98, which is reviewing the seasons of the NFL teams who missed out on the playoffs. Last episode we did the AFC sides. Today we'll be doing the NFC teams. So we'll be running through the teams that finished between 8th and 16th in the conference, and we'll be analysing their year, giving them a rating out of 10, comparing them to what we thought they were going to do at the start of this year. So yeah, we'll just roll it like that. And to start us off, without further ado, we'll start with the Arizona Cardinals, finished in 8th in the NFC, just missed out on the playoffs. It looked like they were going to make the playoffs for most of the season, and then the last 6 weeks or so, they kind of fell away a bit. They finished the year at 8-8, which isn't bad considering where they were last year, but they were expected to jump up a lot this year. And I think it's probably similar to what we would have predicted, I'd say. I think saying they were a double-digit win team in the preseason would have been a pretty unique opinion. I predicted them to come third in their division, which they did. However, I got the order wrong way around. I didn't get the 49ers coming last, but I'll talk about that when we get to them. They had a pretty solid strength of victory, up over 400 record. The winning percentage of the teams they beat. Their team's just pretty solid all around, really. Their offense, defense, there wasn't really too many weaknesses, but in saying that there wasn't too many standout strengths of this side. They were just a pretty well-rounded team who hit real good form in around week 6 to week 10, and then either side of that they weren't as good. But yeah, it's a tough one because if you look at their season now, you probably think it's actually a little bit disappointing given how they looked at stages. But if you compare it to what we were thinking pre-season, you got to say they've had a pretty good year. So if we're looking at their out of 10 score, I'm going to give them a 6. I think it's just a little bit stronger than, not necessarily in terms of their record, but how competitive they were to beat teams like Seattle and stuff. That's pretty impressive. So yeah, and they also beat the Bills, who look like a chance to actually win the Super Bowl. So I think they've had a pretty good year. Yes, they left a bit of a sour taste in our mouth with the way they kind of collapsed on the verge of making playoffs, but yeah, overall, pretty good year for the Cardinals. DeAndre Hopkins made the All-Pro second team. Buda Baker made the All-Pro first team at safety. Hopkins was ranked, according to PFF, as the 7th best wide receiver of the year. So that trade turned out to be as good as we were expecting for the Cardinals. Found themselves a real steal there, only trading away David Johnson. The biggest positive of the Cardinals side was their rushing attack. Chase Edmonds and Kenyon Drake formed a very good combination, along with Kyler Murray running a lot of yards himself. They were right up there in yards, touchdowns, and yards per attempt in the league when it came to rushing. So their O-line has done pretty well there, and so have the running core themselves. So overall, pretty good year. Things are looking good in Arizona. They haven't got... I think Larry Fitzgerald and maybe Patrick Peterson go to free agency. I definitely think Fitzy is a free agent. Not sure about Patrick Peterson, but yeah, positive signs for Arizona. Their quarterback's only completed 2 seasons, so I'm sure there's going to be better things to come out in Phoenix. So Yeah, good season from the Cardinals. Actually, I don't even know if they play at Phoenix. They're playing like Glendale or whatever, Scottsdale or something. But, Phoenix, Arizona, same thing. Next up, we have the Minnesota Vikings, another team who they had a bit of a bizarre season, really. Given the fact that last year, I think they finished with 10 wins or something. We were right up there with the Packers in the NFC North. And this year, they backed that up with a 7-9 record. They were expected to decrease their levels a little bit. Their defense is not what it used to be 2 or 3 years ago. They traded away a few players, including Stephon Diggs and Xavier Rhodes, left them as well. And yes, I predicted them to come third in their division. Successfully predicted that division completely, actually. But yeah, probably a little bit underwhelming season from them. Dalvin Cook once again backed up his performances from last year, if not better than, and he's looking like a real top 3, if not one of the best if not the best. I actually don't know who the best running back is at the moment. It's tough to say, but he's right in the conversation, Dalvin Cook, as both a rushing and receiving threat. The biggest positive coming out of their season is probably got to be Justin Jefferson. I was pretty excited to see how he went. It was interesting. All the players coming out of LSU, especially in the offense, you kind of were a little bit worried that it was just down to the system that they had at LSU as to why they were so good in college. But Justin Jefferson showed us that he could be good in any system because he's absolutely killed it this year. He made the All-Pro second team as a rookie, which is pretty impressive. He's finished the year ranked as the second best wide receiver according to PFF and the number 1 rookie of the year. So incredible season from Justin Jefferson. He was highly touted coming into it, a first round draft pick if I'm not mistaken, but I think he was 4th off the board with Judy, Ruggs and CeeDee Lamb all going ahead of him. So there was not too much attention on him when it came to like the draft night and stuff like that, but he really put on a show all season. Other people who did quite well, Adam Thielen had another good year. He kind of bounced back from a bit of an off year last year, had injuries and stuff last year, and he came back to his reliable best, was ranked 6th according to PFF's wide receiver rankings. Their defense is really what let them down though. Their defensive line just couldn't really put any pressure on, finished 32nd had the worst pass rush in the league, and their secondary has taken a significant dip in the last 2 years, and they were ranked 23rd this year. Also, their O-line was ranked 26th, so those 3 units, not great, but their skill position players are very good. They finished, in terms of rushing stats, in the top 10 for pretty much everything. So yeah, an alarming stat for them was they had the second worst. So when opponents, this is a tough one to explain, but they had the second worst percentage of conceding a score for every drive. So they averaged a score concession every second drive, which is the second worst in the league, which is not ideal. But yeah, their offense was pretty impressive. It was more just the defensive side of things that really let them down this year. So not good from the Minnesota Vikings there. Yeah, it's a tough one. People are expecting them to drop, maybe not this far, so I'm probably going to have to give them a below par score, par being 5. So I think I'm going to have to give them a 4 out of 10. Realistically, they were right in the playoff picture to the last couple of weeks, so I guess they weren't completely off the wagon, but yeah, it was a little bit of a concern how far they dropped. But I think Kirk Cousins showed good signs this year that he can be the man going forward. It's more just the defensive side of things that they've got to fix up. Number 10, 10th in the NFC was a bit of a shock. They had a very unlucky year, though, it has to be said, and that is the San Francisco 49ers. I predicted them to come first in the NFC West. I think I predicted them to win the NFC. Actually, I cannot remember. That was a long time ago. Actually, no, I predicted the Saints to win the Super Bowl, so certainly didn't have the 49ers winning the NFC, but I had them up there. They finished with a record of 6-10. Definitely underwhelming, but a lot of it is down to injuries. I don't have all the injuries they suffered right here, but I know Jimmy G was injured for most of the year. Kittle was injured for most of the year. Raheem Mostert was injured for most of the year. Richard Sherman was injured for about half of it. Nick Bosa missed pretty much the whole year. Solomon Thomas missed pretty much the whole year. So definitely were struck down by injury, and it wasn't just one or two. It was 7 or 8 or even 10 starters who missed a lot of time, which clearly hurt them, but probably doesn't excuse them of going 6-10. I still think they had a good enough team to go 8-8 or something like that. They lost some pretty bad games, like they lost to the Washington football team, and they lost to Dallas in the last month of the season. So both of those games pretty poor from the 49ers. I thought they were actually a sniff after the bye week. They were down and out, but I thought it seemed they were down and out, but they had a fairly easy run of fixtures home, and Arizona and Seattle weren't in the greatest of form, who were their last two opponents, and I thought they were a sneaky chance to duck in that 7th seed in the NFC, but they just completely collapsed and lost to Washington and Dallas, so that really disappointed me. In terms of their unit rankings, their O-line finished ranked 9th, their secondary finished ranked 11th. They had a real find in Jason Verrett at cornerback. Fred Warner made the All-Pro first team at linebacker. He put on another real impressive season together. Brandon Ayuk was another positive. They drafted him, I think, in the 2nd round, and he finished 8th in the PFF rankings of the rookies, so that was a real big positive. I know he didn't get to play too much with Jimmy G, and I'm not sure if Jimmy G will be there next year or what's going to happen there, but him and Nick Mullins made a real good combination there. In the absence of Deebo Samuel, so that looks like they've found a real good one there. But it's going to be interesting to see what they do. Trent Williams and Richard Sherman both hit free agency, so they're two very important players, but we'll see if they re-sign them or they let them go and look in a different direction. Big questions are whether they draft a QB or try and pick one in free agency, or they just back Jimmy G in. But I'll talk about that in an upcoming episode in what each team needs from the draft and free agency. In terms of a rating out of 10 for the 49ers, it's tough to rate them because obviously you got to take into account injuries, but overall they did win the NFC last year, made the Super Bowl. Weren't too far off winning it, so it's got to be a below par year for them going 6-10 despite the injuries. Oh, I don't know whether to give them a 1 or a 2. No, that's probably a bit harsh. I think without injuries, it'd be a 1 or a 2. Considering injuries, I'm going to give them a 3. I think a 4 would probably be fair, but the way they've ended the year, they had a lot of guys come back from injury, but they still played pretty poorly against some weaker opposition. So, yeah, I'm going to give them a 3 out of 10. Disappointing year from the 49ers. Next up, we've got the New York Giants. I predicted them to come 3rd in the NFC East. They ended up coming 2nd and were a whisker off making the playoffs, which is pretty incredible, but that's what the NFC put up this year. NFC East, sorry. They went 6-10 and almost made it. They had a pretty tough strength of schedule, which is interesting given how poor their division was, but their strength of victory was alright, better than their division counterparts in the Dallas Cowboys. They had some solid wins, the Giants. They beat teams like Seattle, and they had a big win over Dallas in the last round. Also beat Washington both times, so there's arguments to say they were actually the NFC East best team, but I think Washington were fair to make it. But yeah, their O-line was their main disappointment this year, ranked 31st according to PFF. Really let them down. Their running game was actually not bad in terms of volume, with Wayne Gallman running the house down in Saquon Barkley's absence, but in terms of yards per attempt, it wasn't the worst, but it wasn't great, and then their protection of Daniel Jones was pretty bad, which led to their passing attack being rated in the bottom 5 in the competition in most areas. Their defense, however, was really impressive. Probably the bright spot of the NFC East this season would have been the Giants' defense, I'd have to say. They allowed the 8th least yards per attempt on the ground. They allowed the 5th least touchdowns in the air. So, yeah, really impressive year for the Giants. And they kept a lot of good teams to low scores. So, very impressive from them. They kept them in a lot of games. Still question marks over Daniel Jones. Talked about it in yesterday's episode. in regards to blokes like Sam Darnold, Drew Lock, Tua Tagovailoa. So he's probably another guy who deserves another year, if not two, to have a look what his really, what his real ability is. But question mark's still there, but he's worthy of giving another shot next year, I believe. But yeah, their defense was just the main bright spot for the Giants. Leonard Williams, they're one of their better edge rushers. He hits free agency, which will hurt them, but they might re-sign them. We'll see about that. They're also rumoured to be a big player in free agency this year, so we'll see how they go there. In terms of a rating out of 10 for the Giants, it's tough. I think it's got to be above. It's got to be above par. 6 wins, almost making playoffs despite the weak division. I'm going to give them a 6 out of 10, as their record is 6-10. I think it's just above par. It wasn't an outstanding season, but it certainly wasn't a bad one in the context of the NFC East. It maybe made their season look a little bit better than it actually was, but yeah, I think they're worthy of a 6 out of 10. Right, next up we have the Dallas Cowboys finishing the year with a record of 6-10. Below the Giants on a tiebreaker. I predicted them to come second in the NFC East. They did come third. I think it was a pretty disappointing year from the Cowboys, mainly due to Dak's injury, but overall it was still not really good enough even when Dak was playing. I think everyone bought into the Cowboys too much this year, though. I don't think they really... I don't really know why people were expecting such a big improvement from them. They were pretty bad in 2019, and really all they added was CD Lamb. And apart from that, they lost a few pieces on defense. So if anything, I thought they were going to get worse. And I think that was actually proven right there. I don't really know why people thought they were Super Bowl contenders, 13-win type team. I think they would have I think they definitely would have won the division if Dak played the whole season, but I don't think they would have been a contender in playoffs at all. I think they probably would have got knocked out first week, as the football team did on the weekend. Their strength of victory was pretty poor, just a tick over 300, so they didn't beat many good teams. Their D-line was a big improver this year. They finished 10th in terms of the PFF rankings. Blokes like Alden Smith and a few other guys coming back. I think his name's Randy Gregory. I think he had a pretty good year himself. So they've got a nice few pieces there. Their secondary, though, is just pretty awful. They let go Byron Jones, didn't even replace him, and just went exactly how you'd imagine it went. Their big concern, though, this year, I would say, was their O-line. Took a real step backwards. Most of them were injured for throughout the year at parts, but still, when they were fully fit, they just did not look good as well at all. Zeke Elliott ended up rendering a lot of snaps to Tony Pollard. Zeke, it's going to be interesting to see how he bounces back next year. I know in the fantasy world, there's a lot of talk about whether he will return to being a dominant RB1. A lot of people think he's just going to bounce back to what he was in 2018, 2019, but I don't know. I'm a bit concerned because for me, Dak not being there is not a good enough reason for his performance this year. It doesn't make too much sense to me why he just completely blew out, basically. Dak Prescott hits free agency, though, so there's a question mark whether he'll even be there. I'm pretty confident they'll re-sign him, but we'll see how that plays out. CD Lamb looks to be a pretty solid draft choice. It's a tough one. I was talking about Jerry Jeudy yesterday. He finished as the 15th highest ranked rookie according to PFF, but when it's in context to some of the other guys in his draft class, it looks a little bit less impressive, a little bit more underwhelming, but still, to finish as the 15th best rookie in your class, that's pretty impressive, and that's about where he was drafted, so it looks like they got their money's worth there. He looks to be impressive. It was just a weird year, really. They played with a backup quarterback for most of it, so going 6-10, it's got to be below par. It has to. In terms of my expectations, I'd probably give it a 4. In terms of the public's expectations, it'd probably be looking at a 3 or even a 2. I'll give them a 4 out of 10. Definitely a below par year, but I don't think they should have been as hyped up as they were coming into the year. Next up, we are looking at the Carolina Panthers. It has to be said, I think this team deserves a lot of plaudits this year. They didn't really get talked about much. I don't know how often they played on TV. In the primetime games, I can only think of one Thursday night game against the Falcons where I remember them actually being on prime time. Apart from that, I think they copped just random viewing for most of the season, so they went pretty quietly under the radar. But I think there was talked about them being one of the worst NFL teams of all time coming into the season. Along with the Jacksonville Jaguars, people thought those two teams were dead set going to go 0-16. The Jags went close, but the Panthers did not go close at all. Ended up not even finishing last in their division, as I predicted. Finished above the Falcons, which was pretty impressive. More due to the Falcons not being great, but also impressive from them notching up 5 wins. They took a gamble with Teddy Bridgewater at quarterback. It looked like it paid off early, but his late season form was a little bit of a worry, so it'll be interesting to see what they do there. Maybe they draft a quarterback and to compete with Teddy Bridgewater there for the main spot. But I think Teddy Bridgewater's good enough to be back next year. Joe Brady's first year in the NFL as an offensive coordinator, really impressive year. The young man looks set to be a quality coach in the future, but he's still very young, so it's going to be interesting to see when someone takes a gamble on him. But yeah, 5-11. I wasn't expecting them to notch up 5 wins, but they did. Their defense was pretty impressive given the amount of names they lost. They lost Luke Kuechly to retirement. They lost James Bradbury and a few others. So I was expecting their defense to be awful, and ended up being middle of the pack, which was pretty impressive. Their offense wasn't great. Wasn't bad. McCaffrey missed pretty much all of the year, which hurt them, but Mike Davis filled in fairly well most weeks. Their pickup of Robbie Anderson in free agency was one of the free agency pickups of the season. DJ Moore continued his recent season form, and Curtis Samuel also put up together a pretty good year. So overall, I think it was actually a solid year for the Panthers considering what we were expecting in the preseason. So I would be looking at a 6 or a 7 out of 10. I know that sounds crazy for a team going 5-11. But I think they did pretty well. Statistically, they weren't great in many areas in offense or defense. They were kind of just middle of the road or closer to the bottom in most stats, but notching up 5 wins and coming 13th in the NFC. I think they would have taken that in the preseason. So I don't think you could give them more than a 6 out of 10. So I'll probably just sit with a 6. It was above past season, but still things to work on for the Carolina Panthers. Detroit Lions is next up. I think they had a pretty disappointing year, Detroit. Matt Patricia, he was given, a bit of the board came out and said, if you don't make the playoffs this year, you're done, which I think was a pretty big ask considering the amount of wins they had last year. It was going to take a serious jump, but he didn't make playoffs and he got sacked with about 5 weeks to go, and then they didn't do great after he left it anyway, but it wasn't a great year for them. Stafford put up at some decent numbers, but I do think this was one of the lower, least impressive seasons of his career so far. Usually you can tell that he's just working with a bunch of crap, but this year he looked not as good. He still is a quality quarterback, a top half quarterback, and he didn't have much around him really, but he wasn't as impressive this year. Dealt with a few injuries. So hopefully they get him some weapons next year and he can bounce back. DeAndre Swift was probably the main positive coming out of Detroit's season. They look like they've got a real impressive running back there. He started the season slowly. Adrian Peterson, someone who they picked up just before week 1, I believe, he kind of took the lead role in the backfield, and it didn't look great for Swift, but from about the halfway point, Swift started taking the more important carries, like in the red zone and stuff, and he really started to show that he's a quality player. In terms of defense, Detroit's defense is still a serious issue. Ranked last in terms of secondary, bottom half in terms of pass rush. So they've definitely got to work something out there on defense. They brought in a few free agents this year, and we thought it was going to improve, but it didn't really change anything. In the last few weeks, they were just shipping ridiculous air yardage. It was a bit of a joke, really. But that's definitely something they've got to work out. But on offense, Kenny Golladay was injured for almost all of the season, basically. He hits free agency, so that'll be interesting to see what they do there. Marvin Jones had a great year. He's a serious veteran now, but he still had a pretty good year. In terms of All-Pros, they had Frank Ragnow, the centre, make the second All-Pro team, and Jack Fox, the punter, make the second All-Pro team. But yeah, not too much to speak of on Detroit's season, really. Successfully predicted them to come fourth in their division, but that wasn't rocket science, really. I'm going to say it's a 4 out of 10 season for them. Probably rough to expect as much as I was of them in the preseason. I thought they were a chance of going 8 wins or something like that, so they left me hanging a little bit there. But yeah, just a pretty bog standard season from Detroit. No real improvements from last year, which is a bit of a concern. Next up, we've got the Philadelphia Eagles, one of the more disappointing seasons in the competition. They finished at 4-11-1. I predicted them to come first in the NFC East. They ended up coming last, despite only being a few games off the win. Carson Wentz. Look, it's hard to talk about the Philadelphia Eagles this year and not talk about Carson Wentz. He looks like his tenure as a starting quarterback in the NFL might be done in the short term, which is sad because I'm a big fan of Carson Wentz. Really started getting into the NFL when he was at his peak in 2017, playing like an MVP, so it hurt to see him struggle this year, but there's not really any excuses for him. I've made a lot of excuses for him on this podcast, but he just played pretty bad, and there's no real other way of putting it. They definitely looked better with Jalen Hurts in at quarterback, so he looks like the man for the future, which is exciting. We've got to love a dual threat quarterback, so it's going to be exciting to see what he can do with them next year. Hopefully their weapons are all healthier next year. They dealt with a lot of injuries this year. Sanders missed time, Zach Ertz missed time, Dallas Goedert missed time, Deshaun Jackson missed more time, so it's going to be interesting to see when they all get on the field, because they actually have quite a lot of guns. I'm not sure what's happening with Alshon Jeffrey. His career is almost done. Jalen Reagor probably had a disappointing year. I think it's fair to say, just compared to the other rookies, he never really set the season on fire like most of the other top 2, top 3 round picks did in the wide receiver position. And yeah, Sanders probably had another down year. People were predicting his breakout. Wouldn't say it came. He had a few impressive games, but in an interrupted season, I wouldn't say it was that impressive. But yeah, I guess there's a bright spot coming out of the year with Jalen Hurts. But apart from that, Doug Peterson got the sack. Their defense, it was improved, but it wasn't anything. Oh, the D-line actually was ranked 2nd according to PFF, so that's impressive. Their secondary improved, but still wasn't anything great. So yeah, a lot of work to do for the Eagles, but the good thing for them is their division is not anything crazy. In Jalen Hurts, they've probably, well, I guess Dak will re-sign, but Jalen Hurts is better than Danny Jones and whoever Washington have a quarterback, so they've still got that over their NFC East rivals, and they're only, a couple tweaks away from making the playoffs, so it's not the end of the world, but it's still not great considering where they came from last year to this year. So out of 10, similar to the Niners, they had some very bad injury luck, but I'm going to have to give them a 3 out of 10, really. They played a lot of bad teams, given the fact that their division was really weak this year, and they only managed to scrape together 4 wins. So that's pretty disappointing, I would have to say. And to finish this off, I have the Atlanta Falcons in 16th. Not that it was an opinionated decision. They did come 16th in the NFC. I actually predicted the Falcons to bounce back this year. They had a down year last year after impressive years prior to that. And I actually thought they were going to be the surprise packet of the year. I thought they were going to finish above the Buccaneers. I thought everyone was going too early on the Buccaneers sprouting into a good team, but yeah, look, I've ended up with egg on my face there. They came last below the Carolina Panthers, which is pretty outrageous. Dan Quinn got sacked pretty quickly after 5 weeks of losing. It has to be said, they were only a couple close matches going their way away from having 6 or 7 wins, but still it's not good enough. And yeah, it looks like Matt Ryan's time in Atlanta might be over. There's rumours of him going to places like Chicago and stuff, so it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But yeah, their offense just looks a bit stale at the moment, and their defense, it's not great. Their secondary was in the bottom 5 according to PFF, so That's pretty disappointing. They brought in some big guns on defense. I think they brought in Vic Beasley, and they didn't really have much of an impact at all. And yeah, their O-line was alright. Todd Gurley was one of the more disappointing free agency pickups, I'd have to say. He ended up being like a second or third running back choice for the Falcons, which hurts, but they took the gamble and it didn't pay off. Yeah, look, it just wasn't really an impressive year. The bright spot was probably Calvin Ridley had the breakout year that a lot of us predicted. He made the All-Pro second team, and in Julio's absence, he really dominated. PFF had Julio and Ridley in the top 15 wide receivers, so it's just bizarre that this offense doesn't dominate. They had a few games of putting up big scores, but there were also quite a few games where they only scored about 15 points, so definitely things to work on in Atlanta, but it'll be interesting to see if they get a new coach in, maybe changes it up. That'll be interesting to see because they do still have quite a few good players there. But yeah, very disappointing year. Out of 10, look, it's almost a 1. I'm going to give them a 2 just because they had a pretty bad year last year as well, so I probably should have had lower expectations, but they left me hanging there. So that's all the NFC teams that missed out on the playoffs. As I mentioned yesterday, I'm going to be doing a similar style episode for the teams that made the playoffs after the playoffs happen, or maybe the week before the Super Bowl. I'm yet to decide when I'll do those ones, because I do enjoy, putting the lid on the bottle in terms of capping off the season with a nice summary or analysis for each side after talking so extensively about them over the season. But in terms of the podcast in general, lots more to come. I'm definitely starting to knuckle down back with the podcast after the holiday season. I've planned about the next 6 or 7 episodes, so with many more future prospects as well, so definitely looking forward to it. Sadly, I don't think episode 100 is going to be anything special. I was thinking of a few ideas, but I'm just trying to get back into the rhythm of podcasting 2 or 3 times a week, so it's likely just going to be a normal episode, but nonetheless tune in for that one. It should be good. And yeah, stay tuned on social media for my future episodes. Get around us on YouTube and the listening platforms as well. We really appreciate it. And yeah, I guess I'll see you next week, Tuesday or Wednesday, episode 100. Looking forward to it. Catch you then.